welcome everybody to another episode of Bootstrapped Solo. I am your host, Pratik Shah, and today we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly about running your own practice. This podcast is for those that want to know what it's really like to start, run, and grow a practice. Today's guest is Dylan Ruga. He runs Stalwart Law and Steno Court Reporting. Stalwart Law is an 11-attorney practice that is a full-service plaintiffs litigation practice. They focus on, they have medical malpractice, personal injury, products liability, any type of plaintiffs litigation cases, they handle it. He started his practice back in 2011 and has been growing strong ever since. Dylan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pratik. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being on. I mean, you and I have been friends for a while. We've talked about a lot of this stuff privately, so I'm glad to kind of get on record and talk a little bit about it. But one of the things that is a newer trend is people starting their practice right out of school or within the first couple of years of being a lawyer. But you got licensed back in 2004, right?
I did. I got licensed in 2004 and started kind of going the big law route. And before I started at a big firm, I took a year and accepted a position as a law clerk for a federal district court judge, which at the time was like, it was a great experience. Don't get me wrong. I would not trade it for the world now. But in the moment, coming straight out of law school, all my friends were going to big firms and making a ton of money. And I went and took a government job and kind of struggled that first year. And it was an investment for sure. But then I did that for a year and then went to an AmLaw 100 firm, worked there for about 8 years as an associate, and then made full equity partner after 8 years. So I was the youngest equity partner in the firm.
Wow.
And it was, that was a challenge too, man. Like big law, you get paid well and there's a lot of prestige that goes along with it, but you got to grind it out. And
a couple questions on that I want to ask you. So obviously you must have. I actually, as long as I've known you, I don't know which law school you went to, but you must have gone to a prestigious one and then done well there to be able to get a clerk position at a federal with a federal judge, and then get a associate position at an AmLaw 100 firm. So great job on that. But to be at an AmLaw 100 firm, you make pretty good money starting out.
Yeah, I think my starting salary back in the day was $120,000 or $125,000, which it's a lot of money. And
2005 too, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of money, but like I said, you have to bill. The expectation is that you're going to bill about 2,000 hours a year to support that salary. So they definitely make you work for it.
So, like, what would be your typical first year lifestyle when you worked at a firm like that?
Well, if you just do the math and you assume 50 weeks in a year with 2 weeks of vacation, to get to 2,000 hours, you got to bill 40 hours a week. But you can't just be in the office 40 hours a week to bill 40 hours. Right. You got to be working probably 50, 55, 60 hours a week in order to bill 40. So that meant, lots of nights and weekends. And, the thing about the billable hour is it resets every year to zero. And, you can take vacation time, but whenever I was on vacation, I was thinking I got to make up these hours somewhere. And so it was a stressful way to live for sure.
Yeah. But you did it for 8 years.
Did it for 8 years. I made, the reason that I did it.
Partner's no joke.
Yeah. Well, they dangle that carrot out in front of you and they're like, well, if you just do this long enough and play the politics, you'll make it into partnership. And I did. And I thought that everything was going to be kind of rainbows and unicorns and people were popping champagne and telling me, you've made it, congratulations. But once you make partner, you kind of start all over again because there's a hierarchy to the partnership as well. And yes, I was an equity partner, but I was viewed as a junior equity partner and still had to play the politics. And the biggest difference too is when you're an associate at a big firm, there's no expectation that you're going to generate business and the partners will feed you business all day and have you work on a case. The minute you become an equity partner, at least at the firm that I was at, there was a thing where if you had another equity partner or anyone other than associate work on your cases, you had to share credit with them. And so there was a real disincentive for partners to share work with other partners. They would just have, junior associates do the work. And so the minute I made partner, there was this just a lot of pressure to bring in business. And I was fortunate enough to be able to bring in some clients. But even when I did that, then there was, kind of sharp elbows and infighting amongst the partners about who had that relationship and how'd you get them in the door.
Oh,
it
I
was
talked to them 6 weeks before you did.
exactly.
That kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So for
yeah,
me, man, I just wanted to try cases. I just wanted to get in a courtroom and try cases. And at a big firm, that rarely, if ever, happens
yeah.
because you're typically on the defense side, and there's just a lot of reasons to settle and avoid the uncertainty of going to trial. So
And
almost
so
all of my
what kind of?
cases would settle.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, just jump in. What kind of work did that big firm do? That was it mainly like, was it defense, contract defense, business litigation, patent litigation? What kind of work were you working on?
So I really focused the last 4 or 5 years that I was there mostly on legal malpractice and legal malpractice
Mm,
defense. And so
wow.
I was defending lawyers at other big firms who had been sued for malpractice. And it was super interesting, and I really enjoyed that work. And I got to know legal malpractice pretty well, and then became certified as a specialist in legal mal.
Oh, wow. But so after all that hard work of becoming equity partner, doing what you're supposed to do, you decide, if I'm going to bring in business and be in this silo against other partners, I might as well have my own firm anyways.
Yeah, I kind of looked around and thought a couple things. Number one, I wanted to try cases, and I realized it wasn't going to happen for if I stayed at the firm. And number two, I kind of looked at some of the more senior partners there, and they were doing okay. They were living a comfortable life, but I kind of thought that I can create my own path here and
There's more.
get at least to where they are, and have some more kind of balance in my life as well.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So in the 8 years that you were at that firm, did you try any cases?
Not for any of the firm clients. So the one thing I did do
Wow.
though is I don't know if you're familiar with the LA County TAP
Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
Um,
Why don't
so
you? I'm familiar with it, but yeah, explain to the three listeners we have.
so the TAP program is I think it's a trial advocacy project that's put on by the LA County Bar Association. And what it is they'll train you. You go through a series of a few weeks of training, and then you become a volunteer city attorney. And through that program, you can try misdemeanor criminal cases.
Mm,
And so the firm was gracious enough to train me and a few of my colleagues at the firm to go through that program, because I think from the firm's perspective, they wanted us to be trained on trial practice and everything else. And so once
yeah.
I was trained, I went and tried my first 3 or 4, maybe 5 jury trials as a volunteer prosecutor.
Oh, very
And
cool.
and so I did that while I was still at the firm. And those cases are great because you're literally handed a file like on Monday and pick a jury Tuesday, and you
Yeah.
have a verdict by Friday, and it's all very quick and bite sized.
Yeah, and it's great. I mean, there's just nothing. My first few trials were as a prosecutor, and there's just something about getting on your feet, picking a real life jury, dealing with issues in front of a judge, understanding procedure and evidence, and it gives you a lot of perspective on your civil cases. Because when I left the DA's office to start my own firm and do civil work, when I get into a deposition, the way I took a deposition was very different because I understood how this was going to play out in trial. And then sometimes I'd look at files from people on that had never tried a case, and the deposition was like, helpful, but not as helpful as it could have been, not as clean as it could have been for impeachment purpose and things like that. And getting that experience, even in the criminal space, translates well, in my opinion.
Totally. Yeah. It really gives you a unique perspective, and not just depositions, but the whole discovery process. How are you going
The
to
whole
use
thing.
RFAs? What's going to be important later on, and how you're going to use it. It's hard to get that perspective unless you actually take a case all the way through to trial and see what it's like.
So you were doing 100% defense at the big firm.
Right.
And then when you start, you said, okay, I'm leaving, and you start Stalwart Law Group after 8 years of being at the equity firm, 9 years of being a lawyer, because 1 year being a clerk. I assume you had a little bit of bankroll because you were making pretty good money as a partner and a senior associate at this nice big firm. So you had a little bit of bankroll when you started. But did you know you wanted to go straight to plaintiffs, or were you originally thinking, oh, I'm just going to go do defense on my side?
So a couple things there. I actually didn't have that much money saved up at the time.
Okay.
I was making pretty good money, but also living in West LA, and had a couple kids by this point. And, it's hard to save
Yeah.
money, even when you're making, at that point, I was probably making 200, maybe 300,000 a year, which is a lot of money. But
Yeah.
again, living in the West side of LA with some kids, it's, difficult to save any meaningful amount.
It goes pretty quick.
But what I did have is a wife who also was a partner at a big firm, and I was
Mm,
able to rely on her salary when I started my firm. So we knew that I may not make any revenue at my firm for a little while, but we were kind of comfortable living on her salary alone for the first year or so is kind of what we had planned in order to give my firm an opportunity to get off the ground. Um, and when I started my firm, I brought one client with me, and the story there is, in addition to doing legal malpractice, I also have done some IP litigation work, and so there was a company called Reserve, and Reserve was sued for trademark infringement, and they had hired me to defend them in that trademark case. And so when I left the big law firm to start my own, I was able to take that client with me, and they had actually insurance they had $1 million insurance policy that was paying their cost of defense. And so I knew that I'd be able to bill on that case and work that
that's
case and get paid by the insurance company. And so I started off really, as a defense sided firm. The first few cases I brought in were all defense clients who were paying me hourly. And then it was a transition away from that, from the billable hour, which I've always kind of hated, to a more contingency focused practice.
yeah, yeah. Let me backtrack a little because we kind of glossed over this, but I want to ask about it. So you're living in West LA. You're married. You have how many kids at this point when you decide to start your own firm?
Two kids.
Two K. How old are they
They
at
were
this point?
they were young. I think my son was probably about 5, and my daughter about 2.
Oh man. Okay, so you're in the thick of it with the
Yeah,
kids, right? It's busy. The kids are home, right?
yeah,
Your wife's working full time. Obviously, you mentioned that. So
yep.
at some point you decide to have this conversation with her, like, "Hey, honey, I've been thinking about this, and I know that I worked really hard to become equity partner, but I think I want to walk away from it." How did that go?
Thankfully, man, she was super supportive. My wife has always been really supportive, and that's one of the many things I love about her. But she always just kind of believes in betting on herself. And she because she was also an equity partner at another big firm, she realized that it's kind of a grind staying in that job, and she didn't love doing it either. And so she fully understood why I was saying that I want to go a different way. So I think it made a lot of
Yeah.
sense to her, and she was supportive of it.
I think that's so important to have that support. I mean, every single person we've talked to, everybody has had a different story. Some started with money, some started without, some started defense, some started plaintiff, some started right out of school. But the one consistent theme we've seen throughout this is that for those that were married or had serious girlfriends, they had a supportive or boyfriends, they had a supportive partner. And it's so important to have that because you can't, we're in a conflict type of business, right? We're in conflict with opposing counsel. We're in conflict with our clients sometimes. We're in conflict with the court sometimes. You can't have that conflict when you come home too, especially when you're trying to get a business off the ground because it's not easy.
For sure. And, when you start a firm or really any business, you got to give it 100%, which means that, I remember thinking back at the time now, when the kids were young and everything going on, I would get up at 5 in the morning and knock out work before the kids got up and make
Yeah.
time to do that and to exercise. It's important. And then to take care of the kids afterwards and then work at night when everyone goes down. And listen, there's a lot of long hours, and you got to be a little bit selfish when you start something like this, and it takes a supportive partner to
To
succeed.
understand that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
and,
sure.
and they got to understand that, and they got to be on board. When you were talking about working at the big law firm, and you were saying, "Oh, you're putting in 55, 60 hours." It sounds like, I mean, you probably put in more when you start your own.
Yeah, for sure. You're doing everything from licking stamps
Yeah.
to like doing everything, filing and everything. Yeah, for sure.
When I first started my practice and I would talk to some of my friends, they're like, "Oh, how many hours a week you think you work?" I'm like, "I don't know, man. I don't count. I just do what needs to be done this week because there's no one else to do it.
Yeah,
There's nobody I can blame to say, "Oh, that person didn't do their job," because I'm the only person here.
right. And the reality is, when you start a firm, you're doing several jobs. You're starting the business, you're running the business, you're trying to bring in new clients, you're working up the clients you have, and all of this kind of falls on your shoulders. And all these different jobs take up a large portion of your day. There's no way that you can just do one of those things. You need to be
Yeah.
able to do all of those things in order to be successful.
Yeah. So you left the big firm. You had one client. At least you were billing something. A little bit, whatever it was.
Yep.
Keep the lights on a little bit. But then, like you said, you had to go out and get new business. So, you mentioned in the beginning, you were out trying to get more hourly business. That's what you knew. You knew you had to, kind of get some bills. At some point, you transitioned to contingency. When you decided to make that transition, how did you change your marketing or whatever your marketing was at the time?
Yeah, my marketing was very little. I didn't have money to spend on marketing. I didn't really know about marketing, and I didn't come from a background where marketing it was really important. In the early days, I really just got business from kind of word of mouth and other lawyers that I knew in the community. I was fortunate that um, a lot of attorneys that I knew at big firms in the area that were kind of my colleagues when I was in the big firm space. When I started my own firm, a lot of times they have conflicts at big firms, and
Mm,
they look for a lawyer that they could refer cases out to, or they have a client that has a contingency case that in order to bring a contingency case into a big firm, it needs to be mid seven figures or larger.
yeah.
And so they reject a lot of cases. And I kind of became the guy that my friends at the big firms would send work to when they couldn't take it themselves. So
Yeah. And,
I was just lucky.
and no, see, a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, you were lucky you had that," but that's not luck, man. That's a result of good reputation, not burning bridges when you leave. People liking you, knowing you, and remembering you. There's a lot of people that work at big firms and leave, and then don't get the call
That's true.
on the
That's true.
on the case,
I
right?
do think it's important. I didn't understand how important it was, number one, to make those connections in law school. I really wasn't focused on while I was in law school. It didn't occur to me that everyone that I was in school with was going to eventually be out there in the workforce and potential referral
Right.
sources to me, right? Like I just
Well,
didn't pay
I
attention.
think in law school you don't understand that it's important to have referral sources, like because you just think like I'm going to get a job and I'm just going to work my job and it's going to be all good.
Yeah, especially the path I was on, which was like go to big law and there's really no pressure, at least in the early days, to generate clients. So I was like, not. It was the farthest thing from my mind. Yeah,
It's almost the counter. Like if you go out and told your partners as an associate that you were spending time generating clients, they'd be like, "Why are you wasting time? That is not what we pay you to do. We pay you to work on the clients we already have." So it's almost
totally,
like detrimental to you if you went and spent time trying to get clients.
for sure. Yeah, I agree completely.
All right, so let's talk about that first year of running Stalwart. So you start Stalwart, it's just you. When did you make your first hire for like a staff member?
So actually, my first hire was another lawyer.
Mm,
I brought this one client with me, and I knew I wanted to grow the firm beyond just me. And I had been working with an attorney who was an associate at the big law firm. And when I left, I told her that I was thinking about leaving, and asked if she wanted to come join me. At that time, it was kind of a math equation because I knew that we had this case I could bill against. I knew what our hourly rates were, and so I knew how much
right.
revenue I could kind of support, and I knew that I could support the salary. So I figured while I have at least this one case, I'll be able to support you. Why don't you come? And I was able to bring her over within, I think, about 2 or 3 months of starting the firm. So it was really
That's not bad.
myself and an associate, and no help for the first couple months,
Yeah.
and then we hired our first kind of staff member to help after that, and just kind of help do some of the day to day.
It's kind of funny because uh, uh, the first year is obviously super difficult. You're trying to figure a lot of things out. You're just trying to like figure out how to set up the computers, how to like get mail out on time and get work with stamps.com. Like all those little things you're trying to figure out and it's frustrating because these things take like 3 hours that now take 5 minutes. But then, you get to the point you're at now and do you look back kind of and go, "Oh man, those were the fun days. Those are kind of fun."
I always like the early days of things, but I was shocked at how much I didn't know about how to like do like the basics of litigation. So when I was at the big firm, I would like need to send out discovery or have something filed with the court or served, whatever. And I would have a legal secretary to hand it to and be like, just take care of it for me. And then I started my own firm, and I was like, how do I even do this? Like, how do I put together a proof of service, or like, how do I make sure that this is actually filed with the court? And it was kind of
Yeah.
humbling realizing that I just kind of
Yeah.
skipped over all that and really had no idea how to take care of the basics of litigation.
It gives you a lot of perspective, and then it gives you an appreciation for when you do hire somebody, knowing what their job is, knowing exactly how long something should take, and then knowing how long it actually does take, right? Because it's very easy to be like, oh, creating a proof of service and e-filing, how long could that take? That should be like 5 minutes. And you're like, yeah, in your dreams, dude. It's annoying.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, definitely newfound respect.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're what do you think was probably like the biggest roadblock you felt like you hit in the early years of your practice?
I'll tell you what the number one roadblock was, which is cash flow. It was really surprising to me as someone who came into starting my own practice with no really kind of experience managing cash flow and kind of thinking through the requirements for a contingency based practice. It just didn't really occur to me how much money was going to be invested in these cases and how long it was going to take to get paid back and kind of what that cycle is like, and making sure that I was managing cash flow in a way that was going to make it work. And so I just remember being really surprised by it and having to figure that out early on.
Yeah. So I mean, like, what was the hard lesson that you learned, and how did you figure it out?
The hard lesson is I looked at the bank and there were a bunch of zeros. So
You're like,
yeah,
what do I do
yeah,
now?
yeah. No joke. I ran out of cash in the early
Literally.
days. Literally ran out of cash, and I started figuring out kind of where I'm spending all my money. And I know we're not talking about Steno yet, but this is really kind of how Steno was born. Was because in the early days of running my practice, I ran out of money. I looked at what my largest expenses were, and in most of my cases, the largest expense I had was court reporting. And so
Yeah.
I figured I need to find a court reporting agency that would agree to defer its payments until my case is resolved to kind of correct that mismatch in timing between the firm outlaying the money and getting reimbursed. And there wasn't one willing to do it at the time. And so that was the original idea for Steno, and that's kind of where that was born out of.
Yeah, no, and Steno's an incredible business, which I want to touch on, but real quick, I mean, you had staff at this time and you had an associate at this time. So your bank account hit zero. I mean, what do you do for payroll?
I remember having to basically dig into my own savings account to manage payroll and give the firm a loan. It was right around this time I started talking to banks about credit lines and about how to, start borrowing money from banks. I think early on, the banks were willing to give me a line of credit just based on kind of my personal assets, like a small line, and I had to sign a personal guarantee and kind of all that stuff,
Yeah.
which was super super scary at the time.
Super scary. Yeah.
Um, and
Well, like
they,
it's almost like, and that's the thing that I think it's important for people to recognize is okay, you leave this firm, you leave the $300,000 salary or whatever you're making at the time, right? And that's all well and good, and everybody's on board. And then you're running your firm, and you're like, hey, I'm not really taking home a lot because obviously I'm building a firm, which everybody can understand and get there. Now you're like, oh, hey, now I'm going to go into debt, and
yeah, yeah, for
that's
sure.
a different level.
And like I said, like signing a personal guarantee is something that, like, up to then in my life, I had done everything I could to avoid signing a personal guarantee. It's been ingrained in me. It's like never sign a
Yeah,
personal guarantee because you don't want to put, your house. I was lucky enough to have a house at that point and didn't want to put my house at risk and other kind of personal assets at risk. But you got to do what you got to do, and betting on yourself is usually the right answer. So
yeah, yeah, and
yeah, had to do that and get past that initial kind of cash crunch for sure.
yeah. So then, okay, you get past that initial cash crunch. You get a line of credit. You're funding your payroll, and in this, you're coming up with this idea of Steno. Well, you okay? So you left your job. You start a new business. You go into debt in the new business, and then you're like, "Honey, I want to start another business."
Yeah, basically, all that is true. My wife at that point started looking at me like I was a little bit crazy, but
Well, it's addicting. It's
yeah,
addicting. And you start a business and you're starting to run and you see it coming, right? And obviously, it's not that bad. I'm making it sound worse than it is because you can look at your kind of inventory of cases, where you're at, what your accounts receivables are, how much is out there, and you can kind of get a sense like, yeah, okay, I have to do this, but I know that it's going to be okay because this stuff is coming in very, very high probability this stuff's coming in. And then you start realizing how much opportunity there is in the legal space for whatever extra services you want to provide.
That's right. I mean, I very quickly became good at projecting out kind of what the next 6 to 12 months is going to look like in terms of cash flow and revenue and expenses and all that kind of stuff. And especially once I was able to get a credit line, that was super helpful in terms of
Yeah.
starting to kind of even out everything. But then also, I think one of the biggest things that I kind of realized that clicked too is that when I started off, I was advancing all these costs for my clients and then just getting reimbursed at the end. At some point, I realized that I'm essentially giving the client an interest-free loan. And
Yeah.
so being able to borrow those costs from the bank and then pass through the interest to the clients, which I know you can do in California if it's disclosed in the engagement letter, which we were sure to run by ethics counsel and make sure
Yeah,
everything's
you got to run
square.
everything
I'm
by.
not sure in every jurisdiction it's allowed, but for
Right.
me, I was able to essentially unlock a lot of my own money that I used to invest in these cases by then using the credit line for that purpose, and then also pay back the interest on the credit line by having the client cover that as well. So just by kind of these kind of financial maneuvers, making the whole practice just easier to run. But you got to figure it
Yeah,
out.
and that
Like nobody ever kind of teaches you that going
exactly.
into it, you know?
That's a whole nother thing that like nobody's ever going to teach you, right? Like maybe if you can find a nice mentor or somebody to really kind of show you the ropes, or maybe you listen to this wonderful podcast and you learn it from here, something like that. But like the reality is there's a lot that you don't know, right? If you think, hey, I know I'm a good lawyer, I know how to litigate, I'm going to be great. You probably will. You'll be fine, but you just got to be willing to learn all this other stuff. You got to be willing to learn how to rainmake, how to go get clients, how to network, build a book of business, keep your clients happy, do all the filing, do all those things, learn all those things that you didn't know how to do, nobody taught you how to do, and then learn the business side of managing finances, accounts receivables, understanding what it takes to go get a line of credit. And banks don't necessarily like contingency fee practices because to them it seems risky. Now, I know there's a few banks like I think Esquire Bank and other banks understand the business, but the general typical banks out there, that's been my experience. I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah, well, most banks don't understand that the cases that we have are the same as an inventory, and that this really is something that can be valued, and these are assets of the firm, and they don't know how to value that. And to them, it's all like most people who are not lawyers and who don't come from our industry. When I talk to them about litigation, they think that there's a 50% chance you're going to win and a 50% chance you're going to lose,
Yeah.
and most things, and they don't understand that typically 98% of cases settle, and that very few cases that we take at our firm actually wind up being losers. But to
Yeah.
people from outside the industry, that's just kind of the assumption that's made, and to your point, like a lot of bankers don't really understand that.
Yeah. And so at that point, at some point, you've cleared this cash crunch, and then you decide you want to start Steno. How long after this kind of you realize what the problem is, and you comes to the clear conclusion like, hey, if I've got this problem, other people got this problem, and this is something that I can solve. So then what was the process like of like starting Steno?
So yeah, so I started like asking around other people, like, do you have this problem too? And what would you think about this? And I got a lot of positive feedback, like that would be amazing. We would love that, And so I realized that there was demand for kind of Steno, and realized that there's an opportunity here. But I also knew that I was pretty fully committed with my job and with my family, and I really didn't have the time or the ability to start a brand new company on my own. So
Right.
what I did is I put together a very kind of rudimentary financial model of what the first 12 months of Steno might look like in terms of my assumptions about what the revenue from an average deposition, and the costs associated with that, and then how many depositions you could do a month, and like who you need to hire. Basically, put together a very simple model, and then I thought, well, I should probably talk to people who have started companies before, like startups, and get their advice about kind of, I thought maybe I should put together a pitch deck, or maybe I should, just go talk to VC firms, but I didn't know any, and I didn't really know how to get that started. So I did know a couple of people who had started companies before, and one of them was that company Reserve that I mentioned, I had taken with me from the old
Oh,
firm to the new
wow.
firm. That was a start.
Yeah.
That was a startup, and the guy that started it was his name is Greg, and and I got to know Greg through defending his company in that trademark lawsuit. I defended his deposition in that, and we went through I think a couple mediations together and kind of got to know each other. So when I came up with this idea for Steno and put together the model, Greg was one of the people that I reached out to just to ask his advice. Like, hey man, like I know you've done this before. Like, what do you think I should do? I didn't know it at the time, but he was in the process of selling Reserve, and he was
Oh,
looking for his
wow.
next gig. And so he's like, "Well, send me the model. I'll take a look at it, and then let you know what I think. What I think he should do." I sent it to him on a Friday, and on Monday he called me and said, "Hey, I want to come move to California and start this company with you." And so
Wow.
yeah, it was just kind of very fortuitous. And so Greg is a great guy and one of the smartest guys I know, and a good
Yeah,
friend.
I
A
met
good
Greg.
friend. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
great guy.
he had this whole network of connections that he made by starting his last company that he was able to tap into to help get Steno off the ground. And he was also very understanding when I told him, listen, like um, I I want to help you start this company, but I also have a law firm that I need to tend to, and he got that, and he was willing to allow me to do both, and him and our third co-founder Dan, Greg and Dan really took a lot of the laboring oar in the early days to kind of get everything off the ground, while I was spending most of my time in my law firm and part of my time helping Steno. But Steno actually took space; they subleased space from my law firm office, so we were all together in the same office every
Oh,
day,
got it. So you could just
and I would
walk
just kind of
over
walk
and
across. Yeah, exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
that's awesome. What year into your law firm did you start Steno?
Steno was 2018, so I started my firm 2016, so it's just 2 years in.
2 years in.
Um,
Wow. So you're just kind
yeah.
of getting off the ground in your law firm. I mean, for me, it took probably about 4 years before I felt like, you know, maybe 3.5 to 4.5, something like that, where I felt like, okay, I see this consistently. I see how this is going. I'm looking at my inventory. I feel pretty good about the tracks we're on. Sounds like you probably got there a little bit faster for you to take the leap and start your another company.
It was tough, man. And what I tried to do once I started Steno too is empower one of my other lawyers to become the quote unquote managing partner of my firm. The idea was for me to free up some of my own time to be able to focus more on Steno. Um,
Yeah.
and while that was good in theory, I think that like any business, if you're the founder of the business, nobody's going to care about that business as much as you care about that business. And so, things weren't done quite the same as if I was in it. And I think that, that was, um, it was a difficult time, I think, for the firm. We went through a bit of a rough patch where I just wasn't paying as much attention. And if you don't pay
Right.
as much attention to something, like you can't expect the same type of results.
That's that's just it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, everything needs to be managed, and there are people that maybe self-managing, but they still need to be held accountable, and you still have to stay on top of everybody and everything, and make sure things are to the level and the standard that you expect them to be at. And the reason you started your firm is you want things at a certain standard. And if you're not hands-on all the time, it's easy for people to get a little lackadaisical. And no matter how good their intentions are, it's just human nature.
Yeah, and that's especially true now that, now we have 11 lawyers at the firm and everyone is working remotely. And so that same type of accountability that you're talking about is even more important today, and it's even harder to figure out how to do it now. And so
Yeah.
try the best we can, but I'm sure that there are things that we could be doing better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just building any business is just trying to get better. It's just a constant focus. You're never, I think I know I'm guilty of this. I always thought, oh yeah, once I get to this milestone, whether it's revenue or whether it's number of cases or clients, oh, then it's going to be smooth sailing. Oh no, when I get to this milestone, oh no, then it'll be smooth sailing. And like it's just a different thing that comes up or something that could have been better or gotten there faster or hit the next milestone quicker. There's always another milestone. So, milestone's not the end. It's just part of the journey.
That's right. And I think that's true for life and not just in business. Some people think, like if I just buy that house, or if I just get that car, or if I just, do whatever, I'm going to be super happy, and everything's going to be okay. But to your point, like there's always another milestone, or a thing that needs to be achieved. And so the trick is just kind of how to be content with what you got, and not
Yeah.
focus on trying to get the next thing.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So you mentioned at the top of the show that like part of the reason you left the big firm is you wanted to try more cases. But then you started Stalwart, and then you started Steno. Are you trying cases? How did that work out?
Yeah, so I've tried, probably since I've been at Stalwart. I haven't counted, but probably 5 or 6 cases, something like that. I tend to
There you go.
litigate. I tend to litigate 1 or 2 large, kind of complex cases at any given time. Now that I'm kind of pretty involved in Steno as well as managing the firm. So my last trial was about 8 months ago, plus or minus, out in Van Nuys. It was a personal injury trial that I tried with Brian Poulter, and got a nice 7-figure verdict. And for
It's
me, it
amazing.
was it was great to be back in the courtroom, and
Yeah.
doing trials again. So I I really enjoy kind of the strategy of litigation. I enjoy the kind of mental gamesmanship, and the maneuvering, and all that type of stuff. And so I never want to stop doing it completely, but it's also really hard to litigate a lot of cases while I'm focused on Steno and managing the firm and doing other things as well.
Yeah, because Steno's not a small business. Steno's a pretty big business. You guys are in all 50 states. You're doing court reporting for tens of thousands of firms probably at this point. But you're doing tens of thousands of depots at least all the time. I mean, so it's not a tiny business that you've just got a little side hustle. This is a big business with serious investors that's growing quickly. To do that, to be a family man, and then to also try cases, that's a lot of time.
It is a lot of time. And what I tell people is that there's never enough time to do everything, but there's always enough time to do what's important for you. So you
Yeah.
just need to prioritize all the competing demands. We all have a ton of competing demands on our time all the time. You just got to figure out what's important and focus
Yeah.
on getting through that every day. And sometimes you have to say no to people, and saying no is actually pretty liberating, to be able to say no sometimes, and just people respect it sometimes when you say no. And I'm kind of a people pleaser by nature, and so I want to say yes to everybody and help everybody do everything, but
Yeah.
saying no is actually sometimes just the best decision for everybody involved.
Well, I'm glad you didn't say no to being on the
Right.
show.
I think you said no to me a
Appreciate
couple times, so
No way. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, okay, so what's been kind of biggest headwinds, right? Like in every business, you're going to get some headwinds, you're going to hit some potholes. What have been, we talked about some of the potholes, cash crunch and this kind of situation, but what do you think were some of the biggest headwinds you got? You talked about getting referrals from your old law school buddies and people you work with, but was there anything you felt that was just like, oh man, that really went our way, and if that didn't go our way, it might have been really bad?
Um, yeah, so I'd say the biggest headwind that the firm has faced, and that I suppose we'll probably continue to face, is really developing new clients, and new business, right? So we do as you mentioned at the top of this, we're kind of a full service firm. So we have a group that does medical malpractice and elder abuse, and they attract a lot of cases because there's just not that much competition in that arena. Then we have, and also the lawyers there are just top notch and kick ass,
Yeah.
and kind of the best of the best in terms of what they do. Um, we also have a kind of employment team. We actually refer to as a flex team, because they do not just employment cases, but also commercial litigation and legal malpractice, and other types of stuff. And we get pretty good referrals into there too. But we need to do a better job of identifying kind of what is the highest value cases, and really focusing on those. And what I'd say about the PI practice that we have as well, because we don't do any marketing or advertising for PI. We don't do any pre-litigation. So everything that comes in is a litigation matter that's generally referred in by another lawyer,
Yeah.
or just a client that finds us, but needs something to be litigated right away.
Well, and
And
you do products.
uh, yeah, and products liability, and so we do, but all that stuff is just referred in, right? So we don't do any advertising, general advertising for those types of cases.
Right.
And so what happens is, I think that when we were a younger firm, there was a tendency to just take whatever case kind of came in, right? Like as long as it was a decent case and we thought that there was, we'd be able to prove liability, whatever it is, that we weren't as concerned with, what is this case worth, as much as we were just making sure that we had enough work to do. And as we have grown, I think it becomes more and more important to kind of take a look at I guess the curve or the bell curve of cases that we have, and say, you know what, maybe it's not worth our time anymore to focus on the smaller value cases, and really make a conscious decision to not take in those cases anymore, because what inevitably happens is we get so many of these smaller cases that come in the door that takes up a lot of the firm resources, and it takes up just as much time as some of the bigger cases. It's just not as profitable, and so now it's kind of turning towards like how to become more profitable as a business as we mature and continue growing, and look towards the future.
And it's kind of like a construction company. If you're a construction company that builds freeways, you're not going to come and redo the floors in my house. Like that's not what you do, right?
Yeah.
And understanding where you fit into that ecosystem, it's hard in the beginning. When I had my firm, it's hard when you get to that point to start saying no, because I think if you're the original founder and you had a tough time growing the firm, you're always afraid that you're not going to get business or you're going to lose business. And what if I then need that business and I don't get it? And then really believing in yourself that no, you've built the firm and you've built the business to a point where you can be fine saying no to business. It's a milestone. That's a real milestone to get to, not just a revenue milestone or one of these arbitrary things. That's a real kind of mental milestone, in my opinion.
It's really hard, man. It's really hard to turn down cases that will generate revenue for your business. But you need to be okay with it, because you need to understand that revenue may not be profitable, or that revenue may not be worth you may be able to make more money and more profit by saying no to that case, because it then allows you to focus on one of these higher value cases, and you can do better, there. It'll
just take attention away from, the ROI of that doesn't make sense, because it'll take attention away from this other case you have that needs a lot more attention, because it's just so much more high value, and you've only got a certain number of attorneys and certain manpower. It doesn't necessarily make sense to just keep adding more people to work on cases that you don't even necessarily want anyways.
Yeah, 100%. I'd also say that it's really important to invest in whatever your firm's brand is or reputation. We've tried hard to develop a reputation at the firm of kind of being a high-end litigation boutique. And that allows us to attract other kind of high-end litigation cases, right? And by saying no to the smaller cases, we're able to reinforce that brand positioning that we have, that, we're only here for the bigger, more high-value cases. But listen, a lot of firms, when you start off, you have to take whatever comes in the door. The issue is that, when you litigate those cases, a lot of lawyers, I think, are very tempted by just grabbing the first settlement offer that's made, and trying to end the case because they need the revenue, or because they just don't want to deal with it anymore, or whatever it is. And it's important to be able to say no to those settlement offers that come in, those low ball settlement offers that the insurance will dangle in front of you to see if you're willing to take it. You have to say no and be willing to go the distance and take it to trial, or keep going. And it's not easy to do, for sure.
I mean, litigation is like, for those that litigate, it's like you got to understand the litigation strategy of it, and then you got to understand the negotiation strategy of it, because they will put you in positions, and they will put your client in positions where it's easy for you as a lawyer to say no to an offer, because you're like, hey, I'm going to be here for another 2 years litigating anyway, so I'll just keep litigating your case. Doesn't matter to me. But if your client gets put in a position, maybe if you haven't been in good communication with them, they feel like, they're not really paying attention to my case, I might as well just take it. Or they get desperate because if you weren't actively litigating the case and you weren't pushing depositions forward or pushing discovery, now it's 2 years in and they're like, it's already been 2 years, I don't want to wait another 2 years. Well, that's a lawyer's fault for not staying on top of it and pushing things quickly. There's really no reason for a case to be around more than 3 years.
For sure, especially if you're litigation. If there's pre-lit, sometimes the pre-lit process takes a while.
Yeah.
But also, to your point, like, you need to be keeping in contact with the clients, and it's another decision that we made at the firm, which was to take fewer clients and not try to compete with some of these firms that just are built on volume. You can make a good living and have a very successful firm as a volume practice, and then you can be more of a boutique kind of firm. But if you're more of a boutique, what you're telling people is that they're going to get a higher level of service and just more touches, and you need to really follow through with that, because at the end of the day, your clients are going to leave reviews for you, places. Your clients are going to talk to their friends about you, and if you don't deliver on what you're saying you're going to deliver on, it's just not going to end well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the amazing things about our industry is that there's just so many ways to be profitable and run a business, right? Like you said, if you want to run a volume business, that's perfectly fine. You'll do fine. You can you have a certain business model. If you want to be just, trials only, hey, call me 45 days before trial. That's the only time I'm coming in. That's fine too. You could do that too. If you want to be kind of somewhere in the middle, litigate and try, or just litigate and refer for the trial, you could do all that too. There's a million ways to create the practice that you want, but to understand and to do it with intentionality, right? With
Yeah,
saying like, this is, I want to litigate and I want to try cases, so this is what we're going to do, and we're not going to get distracted by all this other stuff.
you got to have a plan. You got to really be intentional about it. You got to think about what type of firm you want to be, create a plan, and then stick to that plan and be consistent.
And the hard part is sticking to the plan,
Right.
right? Because opportunities come up and you go, oh man, well, maybe I can make a quick buck doing that pre-lit case. And, we've had discussions like that too. Like, hey, should I add this to my practice? Should I do this? Should I do that? It's like, it's hard to say no, but saying no often is the best thing, even when it doesn't feel like the best thing. With that, I want to come to just a couple more questions and I'll let you get back to doing, the 18 things that you're juggling. One is, if you could go back and kind of change one or two things about the way you did things, what would you change?
I'd probably figure out the whole cash crunch thing that we talked about earlier and really kind of make a plan for how to run a contingency practice rather than trying to figure it out on the fly. I'm figuring, like knock on wood, I was able to, get by and figure it out, but I really wouldn't recommend it. I would really say that if I was to do it again, when I started my firm, I would sit down and create a robust business plan about, this is what I want to do and how I'm going to get there. And that would have forced me to think through some of the cash flow things that I talked about earlier. So if I was to do it again, I would definitely spend more
Yeah.
time at the front end being deliberate and careful about how I was going to get to ultimately where I wanted to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just thought of another question I want to ask before my last question. So before I get to my last question, you mentioned earlier about, kind of the attorneys you have in your practice, like Sean and Brian, and those guys are phenomenal attorneys in their own right. And so we definitely want to give them their credit. But the question I had is, for someone who's running a practice, running Steno, and trying to balance being a family, you've got these incredible attorneys that are ambitious and driven and knowledgeable in their own right. How do you keep them motivated to keep working hard for you when they see you kind of bouncing back and forth between these different projects?
That's a good question, man. And what I found in life is to, really, number one, not micromanage people, and to empower people as much as I can, and build people up as much as I can, and also to be as transparent and honest, and pay people fairly, right? So, listen, at the end of the day, lawyers who are working in contingency practice, a lot of the motivation is built around compensation and the ability to make a lot of money. And at my firm, I probably pay more than my competitors do in terms of kind of like what the comp structure looks like. But to me, it's important to kind of overpay in a sense in order to make sure people are properly motivated. And I may be leaving some money on the table personally by doing that, but I know that I can't do everything myself, far from it. And so I get much further in life by surrounding myself with people like Sean and Brian and the other attorneys that I have at my firm, who are able to go out there every day and crush and do great work and do everything that needs to be done. Because even though maybe a smaller percentage of it comes to me than my competitors, in the end of the day, it's a bigger pie, and everybody's
Yeah.
happy and motivated. So
Yeah, really smart, really smart. And so my last question that I ask every guest, and so I'm asking you, is if you could go back in time and talk to the younger Dylan, and not like the high school Dylan, I just mean like younger in the law career Dylan, what would you tell him?
Um, I would tell him to take more risk kind of early on. I think I was early on in my career, I was going the very safe path of just kind of following the prestige, and so I did the law review thing, and I told you I worked for a district court judge, and then I went to big law, and all of it was kind of just like I was doing the path of kind of what I thought was prestigious and kind of cool, rather than thinking about what was really best for me, and thinking about taking some risk. And once I got my head around taking the risk later on in my career, I was able to start my firm, and I've never looked back and never been happier. And so I would just tell the younger me to be more comfortable taking risk at a younger age.
I love that. I mean, I think that a lot of people go to law school because they think it's safe and that there's going to be nice opportunities for them at the end, but being able to swing for the fences is important, and it's not as scary as people think.
And listen, if you're betting on yourself, you can't lose really if you're willing to put in the work.
That's right. That's right. So, with that, I think that's a great place to stop. Thank you, Dylan, for your time. And thank you all for listening or watching. We'll see you on the next episode of Bootstrap Solo. And remember that just because guys like Dylan make it look easy and effortless doesn't mean that it is. And my only ask for you that are listening is if you enjoyed the pod, please share where you share stuff: LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. We can only grow if you let others know about it. And we'd appreciate your help in doing that. Thank you so much. And see you next time on Bootstrap Solo.